Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas. Bluegrass Jam Along is also brought to you by Token Picks, individually machined guitar and mandolin picks to bring out the best in you and your instrument.
It was a fun band to be in, you know. We were growing up, we were learning how to play our instruments. I can hear that, you know, we're all in our infancy as players at that point. And to be able to go back and redo that part, I would love to do that. But that's what I sounded like then, and that's why I sound how I sound now. You know, it was a learning experience.
Hi, this is Matt, and you're listening to Bluegrass Jam Along, the podcast for anyone and everyone who loves bluegrass. Hey everybody, welcome back to Bluegrass Jam Along. My guest on the podcast this week is the one and only Jerry Douglas. Jerry's been on the podcast before, but he's back to talk about a particular project, a band he was in with Ricky Skaggs 50 years ago. It is, of course, Boone Creek. Now, the first Boone Creek record has recently been reissued by Craft Recordings with some extra tracks, and these are kind of not just outtakes and bits and pieces. These are 4 tracks that were recorded for the original sessions and then disappeared. They never got a commercial release. They were never fully finished. And there's a fascinating story behind all of this, how Ken Irwin from Rounder Records wanted to find these and reissue them as part of the record. You know, it never made it to CD, it never made it to the streaming services. So there's a whole fascinating story about this. And I delved into that a little bit with Scott Billington last week. Scott was a long-time Rounder employee and also worked on this project with Craft Recordings. So that was fascinating. Go and check that out if you missed it. I'll stick a link in the show notes. But I also wanted to talk to Jerry about Boone Creek, and this happened pretty quickly after him and Ricky left J.D. Crowe in the New South. Sits at a really interesting point in string band music in general, but also in their careers. They're still pretty young. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of movement in the bluegrass world, and just to hear what they were thinking at the time and what he thinks looking back, and how it was to hear some of these tracks for the first time in 50 years, or for the first time ever with the extra tracks, you know. And just so all of that is just, you know, it's really interesting to me. And Jerry, as always, is a warm, generous, funny, you know, thoroughly interesting interview guest. So it was just a delight to get to talk to him and just sort of look at this record, you know, both from the context of what they were doing at the time and like looking back at it now as well. And I really, really enjoyed this conversation. As I said, there's a link in the show notes to the Scott Billington episode. Check that out. I'll also stick a link in so you can go and find the Boone Creek record. It's on vinyl, it's on CD and a digital download from Craft Recordings. Other than that, all the usual stuff applies. bluegrassjamalong.com for chord sheets, full list of episodes, all the backing tracks, all the Jam Along tracks, all of that stuff. And if you enjoy this episode or any episode, most useful thing you can do for me is to, you know, recommend it to a friend, pass it on to somebody who you think might enjoy it. But that is enough of me talking. Let's crack on and have a listen to Jerry Douglas talking about the reissue of Boone Creek. Jerry Douglas, welcome back to Bluegrass Jam Along. It is great to see you again.
Thank you, Matt. It's great to be back here and to talk to you about this particular subject.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's going to be an interesting one. It's fascinating. There's a lot of records get a reissue, and there's a lot of records that get a reissue with a bit of extra material. But this record is a particular kind of, you know, it didn't get a reissue in any form for years, and then all of a sudden, there it is with some new tracks. It's a fascinating story.
But the new tracks weren't, you know, it wasn't like, okay, here we have these new tracks that we had to chase these things down. It was a situation where the engineer took the tapes and left in 1977. So we hadn't heard any of this music since then.
And that must have been extraordinary, because it's just the process of making that record in itself. Kind of, you guys went into the studio, made a record, And from my understanding, Rounder kind of said, yeah, but it's a bit out there. Can we have something a bit more traditional to go with it? So there was a second session after that, wasn't there?
Yeah, the second session was the one that we really cut the bluegrass record. The first session we were mixed up a little bit, and we knew what we wanted to do. We knew what kind of music we wanted to play, but I think we had gone past the mark of what Rounder wanted to hear from Boone Creek, and so we tamed some things down and recut some things, but we continued to record even after that, and it was a little confusing on who was paying at that point, but we kept going. And then at the end, I guess when the engineer got nervous that he wasn't going to get paid, he absconded with the tapes, and they were found in a garage, years later, thanks to the tenacity of Ken Irwin, and tracking these things down.
And so presumably you hadn't heard any of this for like nearly 50 years.
We would have never heard of any of this stuff again, and it does date itself by the music that we were playing and the way the harmonies are stacked and all kinds of things like that. But it's also to me historical in a lot of ways into what Ricky went ahead with when he got to his country career, and what I learned, gleaned from all of that time in the studio there with Boone Creek, of how to do things. We were really pushing the envelope. We had other record companies interested in us, which created some pretty funny stories later on. But we continued to cut, and we had Carl Himmel playing drums, who ended up with Neil Young for many years. Joel DiGregorio, that was Charlie Daniels' piano player, was playing on this, and a saxophone guy, I can't remember his name, but we went all out in the vocal department and everything. We spent a lot of time in there, and really worked hard on these things. Vince Gill was even in the band at that point. And there were some things that Vince sang lead on that were totally destroyed that we can't get back.
Oh, wow.
And so there was a lot that, there was a huge loss there as well. I mean, there were more songs, but we'll never hear them. So it was amazing for them to come up and go, "Hey, we have 4 new songs you guys cut in 1977. You want to hear them?" Yeah. Yes, I want to hear this. And it was great to hear it again, and to actually revisit what we played like then. We were kids. This was the 70s. This was 50 years ago, and this is what we sounded like then, and what we became later.
Well, and you said this, it's interesting historically, and it is in so many ways. Like that period in the middle of the 70s was a really fascinating time for string band music anyway, as people were sort of pushing it in different directions. You kind of had you guys, Newgrass Revival are coming through. There's, Seldom Seen. There's lots of interesting things going on. But also at that point, it sort of feels like a bit of a springboard for both you and Ricky, and potentially for the whole band. It's just like that moment, knowing now, listening to it as I do, knowing what came since, is a fascinating little point in time.
It was an educational period for us. We had, the studio was like a treasure chest. You just jump into it and start plugging things in, and so it was like a laboratory for us. And Ricky and I were really hip to old gear, and at that time it wasn't old, it was brand new, but now it's old. But LA2A compressors, and all of these great old Neve consoles, and it was just a real learning experience. But I think we learned a lot and got our broader picture of what the music world for us was going to be like we got a good start on it right there in the studio with Boone Creek.
We'll be right back with you just after this. The long-awaited Hill Country series from Collins Guitars represents a new voice in their acoustic lineup. Rooted deep in the bluegrass world, these new Dreadnought and OM models feature a strong fundamental tone with a dry, warm and woody character that's sure to catch the attention of players who hold the vintage instruments of the 30s in their highest regard. Watch world-class pickers Jake Workman, Kenny Smith and Bob Minner perform with new Hill Country instruments on the Collins Guitars YouTube channel, and learn more at collinsguitars.com. Founded in Petaluma, California, and born of a love for music, Token has developed a unique approach to making picks. Individually machined from premium materials like Ultem, Peak, and compression moulded Taulon, Token picks are designed to bring clarity, speed, and tone to your playing. Used by top artists like Chris Eldridge, Jake Workman, Andy Falco, and Trey Hensley, Token picks are fast becoming a bluegrass favourite. Follow on Instagram at TokenMade and learn more at tokenmade.com. Yeah, and it's a very kind of wide palette of colours on that record. Like, particularly thinking about what it would have sounded like without the more bluegrass stuff in there. There's, there's a real West Coast vibe to some of it. There's like elements of it are almost like Lovin' Spoonful. There's, and like sort of all these influences and flavours going in.
It was the 70s, there were a lot of major sevenths, and, these days there's a $50,000 fine on a major seventh, so you can't play it now. But back then it was all the rage, and we ended a lot of songs, just, they never ended on the chord the major chord of the tune. You would always drift off into some, dreamy land. And the vocals were set up that way, and it was like, I can't describe. The Mamas and the Papas. The Bee Gees were really popular at that time. The music reflects the time. The music that we played reflects the time that we were in, the period we were in, and we were trying to be commercial. Be a bluegrass band, but be commercial. Take it somewhere that maybe it hadn't visited before.
Yeah, and coming out of kind of what you and Ricky had come out of with sort of J.D. Crowe and something that was both old and new at the same time, if that makes sense. That kind of 0044 records got heaps of tradition, but also a kind of a different kind of sound as well. And so was that a kind of conscious thing then for you guys to start something new that would just expand things much more than that?
I think it was. Yeah, we were trying to push, like I say, we were trying to push the envelope and see what these instruments could do. And not just the instruments, but the way we would treat our vocals, without even thinking of it that way. I'm putting it in the terms that I would use now. Back then I would have probably said it in a totally different way, trying to figure it out. These different vocal stacks and different parts in the vocal stack. And we started out by using Cheryl White to sing higher parts with us, forgetting that her sister Sharon sang higher than her. And so finally Sharon started coming in too. And so we had finally this choir going on all the time that we had access to. So we would all stick around and hear parts, let's put that part on. Let's put that part on. That'll change it from the ordinary. We were trying to be different. And we really did. I think we went a little past different. And the next record that we did was even on a different label, but it was more of a bluegrass record. By then we had figured out that what we were trying to achieve with the Rounder record, we were just too far ahead of it. We couldn't pull it off yet. We couldn't afford to take a drummer and a piano player and all these other things out on the road with us. We had to make a living. So we reverted back to more of a bluegrass setting later on. But this record was our big experiment and early on in our career. So it's kind of, it's interesting to see, to hear it, and to kind of go, oh, okay, I remember hearing this sound on one of Ricky's records, or Jerry did this kind of instrumental treatment on one of his records. So it shows up later, but we were just trying to source it at the time, just trying to come up with something different that would bring in a broader audience for bluegrass music and for us in particular. But it was going to be too expensive for us to take it out, so we had to revert back to the bluegrass thing, which we were very capable of and loved. We didn't ever want to leave the bluegrass part of it behind. We wanted that was going to be our thread, and then attach all this other stuff to it. And we did it. We did it. We added the kitchen sink a few times.
You definitely made use of the tracks available to you on the tape, didn't you?
Yeah, and Sundance, the guy that was the engineer, was a brilliant engineer, and it turned us on to a lot of tricks, and we were just a big old family in there in the studio, and we were just recording away, just not paying attention to we weren't looking at a clock. We were in there at all hours of the day. If you had an idea, you go back in there at 3:00 in the morning and put it down.
Was that a new experience for you? Because a lot of, particularly bluegrass records, at that point, you have your songs, you go in and you cut them pretty quickly, pre-live. Like, had you had the chance to spend that kind of time in the studio before?
Never. Usually, yeah, you had rehearsals before you went in the studio. As a bluegrass band, you didn't have a very big budget, and great if you could get a good studio and a great engineer and everything that you needed to just put this stuff down on tape and mix it and put it out. We had all this time. We had a bigger budget, and we had all this time, and we just started into it, just kept finding tangents, and we went down the rabbit hole pretty far a few times. But it was great to have that much time in the studio and to be that relaxed and to be able to work out these different parts and, A-B and try and fail, It was fun to have that much time. And we had never had that much time and to mess around with, and really flesh out things before.
And do you remember like how long you spent recording in total? I mean, it sounds like it was carried on for a while after it was supposed to have stopped.
It felt like years, but it was only I think we did it in two sections. Part of it was in 1976, and there were even dates on the tracks that were in 75, which is pretty close after Ricky and I left J.D. Crowe in September. So I think there was a November session of Boone Creek, with Terry Balkum and Wes Golding and our bass player. He's in the credits. But we didn't really have a bass player when we went in. He was a hot guitar player in Lexington who played. He played a Les Paul. He was a great guitar player. Played some steel. He played pedal steel on the record. If you hear pedal steel, it's Freddie Wooten. That was his name.
Okay.
And yeah, it was the beginnings of Boone Creek, because Boone Creek became a completely different sounding band after this record. But this was our shot. We were taking a big shot for right out of the chute, and Rounder was with us the whole way, and they were great. And then we got. I remember somebody coming in from New York who wanted to sign us up to a big old publishing deal, and showed us these numbers that scared us all to death, and we all ran back to Lexington for a while and reconnoitered and felt like, okay, I think we're finished recording. I think we need to leave this situation. So that's when we stopped going. And and the studio closed, the records disappeared, the tapes disappeared, and 40 some years later, they're found, and they're all corroded. A lot of mold, and there was a lot of technology that went into bringing back these 4 songs that nobody's heard in 50 years. And, baking tape, demolding tape, all of the things, that you can do to try to bring something back, they did, and were successful with those 4 tracks. And to me, that's amazing in itself. They could do anything with them. We had given up on it long ago, figured it's just gone. I have a cassette tape that may have some of the stuff on it, but, even finding a cassette machine that works at this point in time is a hard job. But I have a tape that I need to go through it and see. I found some Vince warbling on there, but the tape was pulling very slow and sounded strange. I'm not sure the tape's going to survive, but, yeah. I really wish that the things with Vince had turned out, and to see, what we'd even do with it, because they were really advanced. I mean, the next time I saw him, he was singing, a song about on top on solid gold on TV. Vince has got his first beard he ever grew, and he's singing. I forget what the name of the song was, but it was this huge pop hit. And so Vince made the right move at the time.
Well, I mean, it didn't turn out too badly for any of you in the end, did it?
No, it didn't. No, it was a great, like I say, it was just such an education, and that seems to be what we were more into than delivering what we had originally said we'd deliver. But we did deliver that record, and it went well for the record. But I'm happy that it's coming back out after all of these years with these extra cuts that long lost brothers who they haven't seen each other in 49 years, and here they go. They're going to show up on the same record.
When was the first you heard that they'd been found?
Ken Irwin told me he had found them, and I was just like, oh man, what kind of shape are they in? Because I know that you have to be really careful with multi-track tape. You have to keep it climatized, and these things had not been. They were on a garage shelf, in a unclimatized, just a building, and all kinds of things can happen to that tape because it's a petroleum-based product, and the oxide sticks to the tape. And if the tape gets warm or too hot or too cold, there's no magnetic ability anymore, and it doesn't stick to the tape anymore, and it falls off, and that's your music falling off into the dust. You can't get that back. So you have to be really careful how you do this. So I'm just amazed that they could do it.
And it sounds great. I've been listening to it. Just those 4 tracks. It all sounds so kind of vibrant and clear. And it's astonishing to think they've just been sat around 50 years gathering dust and mold, and there they are.
There they are, and I was surprised at the sound. It's remastered at the sound of the record itself. And the songs that we did on that record, and the way we did them, with full band and all that stuff, it was the only time they sounded that way, probably ever. We would take a drummer out with us once in a while. We never took piano or anything like that, but we would take drums once in a while and try to recreate the feel that we've had in the studio. But we never did quite get back to it. And it's a shame. I would have liked to have fleshed that out and really seen where that could have gone, and especially at that time. Now it might not fly, but back then, we had a lot of important people looking at us. Like at the same time that people were signing Kansas and groups like that. big hair bands.
There's a definite sort of what if moment about that record. So I'm listening. It's funny because I can only listen back to it with the context of listening to it now. But there's that, just the way you talk about it and the way Scott Billington talked about it when I talked to him, there's a definite sense of like, I wonder what would have happened if that had sort of stuck and you'd been able to take a band out like that and that had come off and that band had taken off in that way.
Yeah, it would have been a bigger production and there would have been tours lined up with other major acts and things like that if we could have taken that to the market. But we never had a chance to. So that one just withered, but it was the grand experiment, and I'm glad we did it. And it's good. It's great to hear it now because it's a bluegrass band. Like, if you had never heard the original record, to sit down and listen to this one, it's a totally new sound. You don't hear that now, and there may be a reason why. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed listening to it back when we started working on it again and the new tracks showed up. It was like visiting an old friend, It was nice.
And it's great to have it there because for a lot of people, unless you bought a copy on vinyl in the 70s, like it never made it to CD, it's not been on the streamers. And Scott sort of said that Ken was reluctant to do it until he'd convinced himself he wasn't going to find these tracks, but he was on a quest.
He was really on a quest. There's another whole complete story of what he and Sundance finally, when they found each other again, there was another tangent to that meeting as well. But to finally get those tapes back was really wonderful. And for Ken to find them was, he was the guy to find them. He was the guy to track them down. Ken's one of the most tenacious. He doesn't let up. And he never will. He's going to be busy forever, and he's just wonderful.
Everything that I haven't spoken to Ken, but everything I've heard about him and everything I've read about him and everything that Bill Nowlin told me about him when I spoke to him, you just get the sense that there was not a man that was ready to retire.
No. Everybody else has sort of settled back and been, they're all back in business again together, and it's wonderful. With us, with Allison Krauss out here, and being on that label, it's like homecoming, because Rounder was, this band was a big fish in a small pond, and now it's back to that, and we have complete trust in what they do. We've all had experience together before, and it's nice to be back with them, but they never retired. They always kind of were sitting back thinking about it. I don't think any of them wanted to retire. Bill can write, 100 more books about the Boston Red Sox, and everybody will be happy because he's, a leading proponent. But Marion was sort of relaxed, but she's just like Ken. She's not ready to retire and to go into a lawn chair somewhere. None of them are. I can't imagine them ever being that way. They just work hard.
Yeah, it's incredible. And kind of just, I'd love to talk just for a minute about kind of what happened for you after Boone Creek. Because did you go straight into working with the Whites at that point? Was that kind of...
I didn't. I went back to the Country Gentlemen for about 6 months. I called up Doyle Lawson. I said, but Doyle, I'm in between. I need something to do. And he said, well, come on back to us. And I did. And it was wonderful to come back to the band and play with those guys again. But at the same time, I had done some work with the Whites, with Buck White and Cheryl and Sharon. And it was just like, it was the perfect foil for me, having that beautiful harmony going and to be able to back that up. That was in the back of my head. And we finally figured out how to do it. And so they actually came to Virginia and moved me to Tennessee. They physically moved me. and and they became family to me in every possible way. And after the Whites, I started doing so many sessions in town that it became, when I left town, I lost money, and I had a young family, and I had to figure out what are my priorities here, but to leave the Whites was a terribly painful thing, because it was like leaving home, again. Because I'd already done that when I was 16, going on the road with the Country Gentlemen. So here I am again at, 25 years old by then, but playing with the Whites. And, but getting all of these sessions, I was in the studio for about 15 years, doing 3 sessions a day, most days. And, it added up, and there are a lot of records that I played on, but, none of them that have given me any more satisfaction than playing with the Whites, or, especially now with Allison. Those records were all country records, and some of them were hit records, and it was nice having dobro on the radio, and I hit it at just the right time during the traditional country movement. It was when Emmy Lou came in, and Ricky and Randy Travis, and I was playing on all of those records, and did that for a long, long time, until I started to feel burned out on it.
That it's interesting to hear you talk about working with those vocals and those harmonies in the Whites, because certainly something that I strongly believe, and that lots of people I've talked to on the podcast, is that when it comes to somebody who knows how to instrumentally back up a singer and place the perfect note or the perfect phrase between vocal lines, like Jerry Douglas is the first person people always mention. And it feels like that was a big part of your kind of development.
Playing with the Whites was my training ground for, how to stay out of the way of the lyric and the singer, but to also keep in mind what the substance of the song is, and what octave to play against, the vocal, or how to ghost the vocal and make it seem like there's a harmony at some points, but it's dobro. It's not another voice, but the dobro is like a voice, so much like a voice that I can do that. I can sneak around behind the vocalist and so hopefully add something to it. But my goal is to never distract from what the vocalist is doing. If I'm in the way, I'm gone. I'd rather not play, or play one note, as to smother someone that's singing. And that's come in really handy in all of the singers that I've worked with in my life, with Vince, with Ricky, with the Whites, with Emmy Lou, and James Taylor, and anybody. Allison especially, though. Allison is that's now my ground, my fertile ground that I go to and try to play against her sweet voice, and not be an irritant, but be a salve, and help the vocal get along and make an impression.
And it's fabulous, sort of being able to hear this Boone Creek record with all of that in mind, kind of knowing kind of what's come since, and listening back. And you were saying before, like in some respects, there's some musical things that date it, and just having a look at it, like just the cover. I would urge people who haven't seen this record to go and look at the cover, because it's a glorious thing.
Oh, it's us in our beginnings. I mean, in our most expensive jacket that we owned at the time. Wear that. And, yeah, Terry Balcom had just lost a ton of weight. Just a completely distant transformation of a person. And Wes Golding was a sweetheart of a guy, and all the girls were chasing him all the time. And It was a fun band to be in. We were growing up. We were learning how to play our instruments. I can hear that we're all in our infancy, as players at that point, and to be able to go back and redo that part, I would love to do that. But that's what I sounded like then, and that's why I sound how I sound now. It was a learning experience.
There's so many key bits of music in the string band world that just for whatever reason, you can't, like the first Grisman Quintet record, and there's just some things that haven't made it back out. And so just hope that with the work that Kraft are doing with Rounder and Concord, that more and more of these things will see the light of day again, because it's just great to have them there.
I think they will. I think that's their credo, is to bring the music back to light, and to bring some things back. You can't bring everything back, but it's all, you can find it all. You couldn't have found these 4 cuts of this record, of this Boone Creek record, anywhere, but they did not exist, and they were in such bad condition that you couldn't play them. But they've been miraculously brought back to life, and that's amazing to me. It's just, as a studio geek, I'm amazed that they could do what they did to bring it back, and for it to sound that good, and to pop into the record and sound like part of the record. They did a fabulous job, and I'm really happy to hear those songs again after all this time. They were just gone. They were just gone. We couldn't even imagine how we couldn't hear them anymore, so we didn't remember how we'd recorded them. So they just were gone off the landscape, and it's nice to have them back.
It's a really fun listen, and it's been a really fun time getting to chat to you about it, Jerry. Thanks so much.
My pleasure, Matt. Anytime.
Bluegrass Jam Along is proud to be sponsored by Collins Guitars and Mandolins, each and every one built from the sound up in Austin, Texas.